Welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Alli Joseph. I'm already laughing. And I've been watching this guy and his longtime partner, Ray Teller, perform Amazing Illusion since I was a kid. And I'm dating myself a little bit, but time has not dulled
I've dated myself once or twice.
Did you? You're going to tell me how that was.
Yeah, was
Hasn't, let me get through my intro, though. Dulled my
nice
enthusiasm for this man's talents and visual trickery. This is Penn Jillette.
Yes.
Of course, he's still Penn Jillette.
I am.
And he and Teller are in the 6th season of their show Fool Us, excuse me. See, Fool Me? You already fooled me. Fool Us on the CW, where other magicians try to get a trick past these expert illusionists in order to win a prized guest spot in their Vegas show. And he also has a new VR video game where you can fool your friends called Penn and Teller VR, Frank, in case you're looking it up, frankly unfair, unkind, unnecessary, and underhanded. Welcome. That I just was not going to get through that.
Well, see, what you have to remember is
It's a lot of, yeah.
what that abbreviates to. Penn and Teller, F-U, U, 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 and U.
And that has long been, you know, you guys eat those.
We did a show called BS, we do a show called FU, now we do a video game called FU, U, U, and U, and our old video game abbreviated to S&M. So we always have that going.
Was there not enough emphasis before on your on your ethos? I like it. What made you want to get into VR?
Well, you know, we have always, I mean, way back in the 80s, we did a video, VHS tape called Cruel Tricks for Dear Friends. And there is this moment when technology happens, that technology can become a magic wand. People will believe anything's possible. So when video recording first started getting into homes constantly, you could do fake recorded video that people would still believe was on TV, would still believe was broadcast. So we had all these tricks to do. And now with VR, nobody knows what it can do yet. You know, when you first get a VR rig, there's this wonderful kind of gray area where you may know intellectually what's possible, but you don't know viscerally. And you're in this wonderful situation, right? Because the first thing you do when you get a VR rig is you invite your friends over to show them how great it is. And then you take somebody and say, you want to see this VR rig, and then while you're in your home, you obliterate their eyesight and you obliterate their hearing and have them standing in your room, which means all their attention is on what's happening inside their head, so you can do things out in the real world that you can change. Now, obviously, the first thing you would think of is if someone is, you know, out on the ocean or something in the VR, you could throw a glass of water on them. That's the simple stuff. Mm-hmm. But we went and got very, very complicated so that people can believe they're seeing really phenomenal stuff happening that VR is not capable of doing, but with an accomplice in the room. So this is a game that you play not against the game, but it's actually a tool you use to scam your friends out of mostly dignity, but occasionally money.
And there comes the underhanded.
Yes.
And it is unfair.
Yes.
That sounds fascinating. I'm not
certainly unkind.
I'm like a reality, not VR person myself. Yeah. That's why I work primarily in nonfiction, but I certainly appreciate the draw of this, and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, me too. The answer, you know, me too on that. This is something that it's just a way, you know. I believe, having made the joke of, you know, steal money and dignity, I believe my rule on practical jokes is that the person for whom the joke is played on must enjoy it the most of anybody. And we do use that sensibility. So you're really not talking about being in a fictional world like you would normally with VR, mm-hmm. but you're talking about an interaction with a person where you take the opportunity to show them how much you care about them by pulling a scam on them that makes their mind be blown, or blow their funky minds, as George Clinton said.
Right, or one of the other Fs.
Yeah.
Right. So I did say in my intro that I finally got through that I have been following you and Teller for years, and it is true, I dated myself, but my dad took me to your shows when I was a kid here in New York. I think you were still off Broadway, untelevised, wow. And it was probably Penn and Teller Go Public.
I don't think
in 1985. I am that old.
Really?
Yeah, but I just have good skincare.
You were very, very young.
I was very young, but my dad is a fan as well, and you know, you guys have changed in that you've grown, your visibility has grown, your venues, your success obviously over time, but what do you think has changed most about your work and your act?
You know, we have gotten, we've trusted the audience more all the time. I mean, one of the big things that was different about us from other people in magic was our trust of the audience. We wanted to do magic without ever insulting the audience. You know, Jerry Seinfeld said that all magic was, here's a quarter, now it's gone, you're a jerk, now it's back, you're an asshole, show's over. And we really didn't want to do that. We really wanted to let the audience in on the inside, and we really wanted to be fair and kind to the audience. And we began never dumbing down our stuff and always trusting the audience to be smarter than we were and doing stuff as smart as we possibly could. And over the years, we have gotten nothing but reinforcement on that. And so we have gotten, and I think this is a little unusual, we have gotten actually weirder and bolder as we've gotten older. You know, so many people in show business seem to get into show business in order to get out of it. You know, in Vegas, a lot of our peers, they put together a show that they did 20, 30 years ago. And they move it to Vegas and they do it every night and they do a fine job at it. And then during the day, they play golf or they lunch or they hang out. All Teller and I ever wanted to do was put together weird tricks for people. And we've been doing that since we were children. And the idea that, you know, in our 60s, we can have a crew and a theater that's filled with people every night and keep doing weirder and crazier things is just my joy. I mean, I don't know how golf can compare with doing stuff that's in your heart and in your mind that people enjoy.
And that's so lucky that you not only found this as a young person and have been able to not only make a living, but more so do it in the way that you feel is apt.
Yeah, we're in a very odd position because if you talk to anybody with a great deal of success, if you talk to Houdini or Madonna or Howard Stern or Paul McCartney, they would all tell you that they should have been more successful than they were. All of them. Paul has said that. Paul McCartney has said that clearly. So has Howard Stern. Houdini said that constantly. We, however, at our tier of show business, are much more successful than we expected or we deserved. We keep waiting for the invisible hand of the economy to correct.
Well, you know, but
there should be a market correction on Penn and Teller because we always expected to play for, you know, a couple hundred people a night, play fairs, do that kind of stuff. And we were doing that, and we were successful and very, very happy. And then we came to New York kind of on a whim, and all of a sudden it turned out that we were more successful than expected. And that's been wonderful. But you know, we set out, our goal in life was to be carny trash, and we accomplished that very quickly. And
I didn't say it.
We maintained that sensibility.
Well, but you know what? There's something about that, and it sounds cheesy maybe, but the attitude of gratitude. Like, you guys don't go into this with that mentality that you mentioned Jerry Seinfeld has. And I think that's going to earn you more respect from your audiences and give you that longevity that you have.
Well, it also turns out that maybe this is a weakness of character, but if you like our show, I'm much more apt to like you.
I think that makes you...
So we try to be nice to those people.
Quite human. And now you did mention that you and Teller have been doing this since you were kids, right? So that's a nice segue for me to ask you, do you remember a moment or a particular event that made you enamored of magic?
Well, you know, my relationship to magic is my relationship to Teller. Teller had a childhood sickness, and he was like 5 years old, and they got him a magic kit. And he clicked into that, and that became everything to him. Now, I had quite the opposite reaction. I was a rock and roll fan, a big fan of reading, and I wanted desperately to be in show business, but I was in a tiny town, had never met anybody in the arts, never met one person in the arts. And so I learned to juggle. And my first relationship with magic was very, very bad. It was a mentalist, Kreskin, on TV, claiming to be doing science, but actually doing tricks. And I was so upset by that. Now, this is the kind of overreaction you can only get from a child. But I guess I was 13 or 14. And my academic, the idea that adults lied to children about stuff like this, I went from an A student to a D student. I went from being very, very interested in science and academics to no interest at all. It really, really broke my heart. And I hated magicians tremendously. Of course, you don't remember this because nobody does, but the act that was on after the Beatles on Ed Sullivan was a magic act. And when you'd watch those variety shows that I watched as a young child with my parents, the variety acts that would come on around the rock and roll shows, people that were on like after The Who and after the Rolling Stones, I just hated. I had no interest in them at all. And then when I was still in high school, 17 or 18, I met Teller. And Teller said a sentence to me that seemed insane. He said that magic was essentially intellectual. And magic, you know, a greasy guy in a tux with a lot of birds torturing women in front of Mylar, seemed anything but intellectual. But the idea, music, your body moves, you tap your foot. But with magic, you have to make a map of the way the world works and compare what you're seeing. And that is a very high level intellectual event. And deciding how we ascertain what's true is also an intellectual event. So that was an amazing thing to say. And then Amazing Randy, the skeptic, and Teller also said to me that you could do magic and be very, very honest. The idea of saying, within this frame, we are now going to play along with how we ascertain what's true. Not outside that frame. We won't go outside that frame no matter what. But within this frame, we can play with this. That fascinated me. And so my whole relationship with magic starts really with Teller. I mean, before then I was very good with a deck of cards, but only in terms of cardistry. I always liked practicing, liked learning things. But the intellectual love of magic comes completely from Teller. And I'm very unusual in that way because virtually every other magician, Copperfield, David Blaine, all those people, start 5 years old, 6 years old, and their obsession with magic is at that level is where it starts. Mine starts really pretty much as an adult.
Right, but after your heart was broken. I heard you get a little emotional there. Am I
very
mistaken?
emotional.
There's that moment where you remember the Kreskin, but you must have had, you mentioned one. I know my husband's been a long-time fan of Ricky Jay.
Oh, Ricky, yeah.
Did you have influences that you did respect, aside Teller?
Only Randy.
Only Randy.
And Randy was our first mentor, and I can't say my first hero because earlier on it was, you know, Bob Dylan, Mike Nesmith, Frank Zappa, and all the beat poets were my huge heroes, you know, Kerouac. And but in terms of magic, it was Randy. And then I started understanding, you know, once I got over that kind of manufactured trauma of being upset about Kreskin, I then started really liking not the guys on TV, but the guys that were really grinding, doing close-up, guys doing Carney, guys doing, you know, 20 shows a day, and people really living that way. And that's what Teller and I fell so in love with. So we were very happy. You know, when we first hit on Broadway, all the interviews were very uncomfortable because people were always saying, well, you know, you finally made it to Broadway. You were struggling and miserable, and now you're finally here. We'd go, no, we were very, very happy, and we're happy now. But we were happy before. And it's very hard to tell the story of we were doing well and pleased with our lives, and now we're doing well and pleased with our lives. And I'm sorry, but you have to make a story out of that.
Right. It's a harder sell. You talked about, and you didn't say it, I'm saying it, have a little bit less respect for the people who do the show maybe and go out and play golf, and you seem to have a tremendous amount of respect for the grind, the hardest working people, because you and Teller are that way, and you seem to apply that across your life. And I was doing some reading. A lot of people will look, of course, this is Penn Jillette, and he is much smaller than you might have known him a few years ago.
Yeah, I'm 2/3 the man I used to be.
But still even so much more. And that was another aspect of your life that I read. You know, you did an interview with the LA Times and said that how much you respected, like, when you really go for something, go hard and don't do it half-assed.
I didn't, for years and years, like many, many Americans, like as a problem, I struggled with my weight and thought that the best way to do that was some way that was easy. You know, take smaller portions, you know, eat more protein, eat less fat, eat less carbs, whatever you want to do. But it was always little things. And then a friend of mine, Ray Cronice, who I call Cray Ray, who worked at NASA, he had been doing a lot of research on diet and the way people lose weight. And I said to him, because I was, you know, I was really 100 pounds overweight. I said to him, you know, is there a way that I can lose this weight easily? And he said, no, it's going to be really, really hard. And he was the first person to say that. Every doctor had said, you know, it's not that hard, you can lose this weight. And I realized at that moment that in my entire life, I have never respected moderation in any way, ever. I mean, I have never had a drink of alcohol in my life. I've never had a drug in my life. But I've never respected people who drank wine with dinner. But I've had a lot of heroin addicts that I thought were great artists. You know, I always like the intense and the extremes. And for some reason, although I knew that no one brags about walking up a grassy slope, but they brag about climbing Everest, I did that in my whole life. I wanted to do things the hard way, except the diet. So when he finally said, you know, we're going to do this really intense stuff, and I took it as a hard thing, I really dug it. And now when people say, you know, is it hard to keep the weight off? You know, I've hit this magic time. It's now been, you know, 4.5 years, and most people gain the weight back within 2. People say, you know, is it easy? And it's a very hard thing to answer, because the real answer is, I like the fact that it's difficult.
Of course you do.
But then again, that's kind of easy, because that's the way I like to live. So
Right.
it's very complicated thing.
And so now are you maintaining with IF, and for those who intermittent fasting?
Yeah.
You know, it's trendy now, and I know that's not why you do it, but when you began this, I imagine it was sort of lesser known.
Yeah, it was a little lesser known, and I really enjoy it. I did a 2-week fast. I hasten to add, under doctor supervision.
Yes, important.
You really, 2 or 3 days you can do pretty much anything you want. But beyond 3 days, you really need supervision, medical supervision that's competent. You need someone watching you. And I had someone very competent, and blood drawn and all that stuff. Probably I was overly careful, but that's the way I like to be. And that was interesting, but not as wonderful as the intermittent fasting. You know, I used to feel if I had something important to do, that you would get up and have a good solid breakfast to be ready. Now, when I have something, especially with a lot of stress, not eating really seems to focus me. You know, when I went on Jeopardy, where I won.
Yes! Big Jeopardy fans in our house. Kids too.
I was backstage, and the other 2 people were, you know, eating scrambled eggs and bacon and toast and bagels and getting all filled up. And I was
Carved
back
up.
there going, oh my goodness, I'm going to win.
You knew it, right? Well, you are a great predictor of outcomes. It's part of your work. You know, before we went live, we were talking a little bit about statistical analysis of actual numbers in the world, and you look at the world today, and we will get to your show because I want to mention it and talk about some of the difference between that and the other. But, you know, how if you turn on the news and it looks doom and gloom, and we're living in a very particular time now, things you say are actually improving across the board, and why you feel that's the case.
You know, it's interesting because it's analogous, in my mind, to exactly what we were talking about with diet. You know, for billions of years, the biggest problem living things encountered was too few calories. That was all you were living for. What mammals and primates and humans, what they were always striving for was warmth, light, and food, sustenance. And then for this very short period of time, I mean, not even one frictional rub of this huge stone, for maybe 75 years, for maybe one 1,000th of the population, we all of a sudden have this other problem, which is too many calories, too much light, too much warmth. And expecting organisms to deal with that quickly and easily is expecting a lot. Now, for all the amount of time that humans have been communicating information, getting information has been very, very difficult. And as somebody even recently, 300 years ago, the amount of information you would have gotten in your whole life was the amount of information that's contained in one issue of the New York Times. That would be a whole lifetime of information. So now we've got this situation where we have information on suffering around the world that we would have been oblivious to. You know, we would have had a tribe of 300 people that we would have been aware of, and we would have had a really clean statistical view of how dangerous things are. In 300 people, we would know what our big dangers were. If you knew someone that died of that, it was a real danger. But now we're in a situation we get information kind of, sort of ish. There's still a lot of proximity effect, but kind of sort of we get information on 7 billion people. And that gets condensed and sent to us. So when we see 300 people killed, it's very hard. Emotionally, I would say impossible to see what percentage that is of 7 billion. But when we look at it, we can see that by any measure, health, starvation, I'm doing these reverse, but health, being fed, lack of violence, every way, life expectancy. The big thing is all you really need to judge the world is the education of girls. The number of girls going to school will tell you everything. It's interesting. That tells you how much violence there is, tells you how much starvation there is, it tells you everything. The way people treat girls seems to be the metric that tells you everything else. And now we have 90% or over now, 90% of girls on planet Earth are being educated.
Which, you know, and as you also said, things go, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? So, and with that sense of humanity that comes with women is actually a sense that most indigenous cultures were matrilineal, which is a whole other discussion, but led by women, nurtured by women, fed by women, and so on. And
also, that still is an indicator. If the more women you have in power, the more peaceful and healthy society you have. It's just, and that's not philosophical, that's mathematical. That's just statistics.
And speaking of statistics, it was a nice segue for me before we run out of time. Your current show, Fool Us, 6th season on the CW, it's a little bit different than some past shows, always respecting the audience, something we spoke about earlier, always exposing parts of tricks, and yet here you turn the tables on yourself and try to have people fool you and Teller.
You know, you get into magic not because you want to fool people, but because you enjoy being fooled. And then you continue, as you learn about how tricks are done, you continue to chase that first high. It's harder and harder for us to be fooled. So we've put ourselves in a situation where there is a team of people with a lot of money who go all over the world to find people who can fool us. And when we get that, you're talking about statistics, about 12% of the people on the show have fooled us.
Well, that's not good numbers for them. It's very good for you guys and your brand.
But 12% means that every season we get deeply fooled by about 15 people, which is a pretty wonderful feeling to look at something at our level, to look at something and just be completely blown away. There's an interesting thing that happened. It's a real weird glitch that I don't think anybody noticed, but I did. Last season, we had we pushed very hard for this because it's magic is, I don't think there's any way to couch this. Magic is sexist. The Magic Circle, biggest magic organization in London, did not allow women on the premises until the 90s.
Wow.
You know, the big organization is the International Brotherhood of Magicians, but all of a sudden, because of the internet, because you don't have to be in environments that are uncomfortable, there are a lot of girls into magic. I get asked all the time, I have 2 children, they say, is your son into magic? And I say, no, my daughter is. My daughter's a big fan. So we pushed really hard. Now here's what I found interesting. Last season, we had 6 women magicians who were on as not part of a team, but were on solo performers. There were 6. Out of those 6 women magicians, 6 fooled us. There was obviously a kind of thinking that in this whole you know, we're in our 60s, we've been in magic all this time. We are completely surrounded by the culture of magic that didn't include women. And until I noticed it afterwards, I didn't notice any sort of thing, but I went, wow, there is a new kind of thinking. Now, you don't know, there's no way that's gender related, but it is outsider related. It means that people that came up a little bit outside of the form knew things that we didn't know, being so deeply inside it. And nothing pleased me more about all of the seasons of Fool Us than that particular fact. Because what's going to happen in magic, I think, it's never safe to predict anything, but what happened in comedy was you went from women not being important in comedy very much at all, with a few very important exceptions, to the biggest comedy stars in the world today are women. In the United States today, I can't speak to the world. And that's about to happen in magic, because it used to be that every other night after the show, some boy would come up and show us a magic trick, and it would be a girl once a year. Now they're even, and that happened in a 2-year period, which means that the number of girls who are into magic now is extraordinary, which means just statistically, we're going to see in 5 years the biggest magic star in the country. It's very likely to be a woman, and I am thrilled about that.
And, you know, even outside of the professional women magicians you just mentioned, and more coming up, I imagine there's more known young girl and women fans of magic, and you teach a MasterClass, right? So what can fans learn in that MasterClass?
Well, we are very conscientious. You know, Teller was a teacher. Teller taught high school Latin and Greek. Teller's very interested in teaching, and Teller worked very, very hard in the MasterClass to make sure that someone could watch it and with a little bit of practice actually get the feeling of doing tricks for other people and learn the skills. As I said, my daughter, besides having the best magic teachers in the world, and I don't mean me, I mean my teachers, Johnny Thompson, who died recently, this is his bracelet, but he was our mentor for 20 years, worked with us in every trick we did. When anybody would ask my daughter, Moxie, does your daddy teach you magic? She would say, no, my dad's teacher, Johnny Thompson. I'm not going to learn from my dad. I learned from the guy who taught my dad.
Right.
But she, looking at the MasterClass, learned an awful lot of that. That's what Teller pushed for. What I pushed for in the MasterClass was I think there's a lot of thought that's gone into magic. A lot of thought about how empathy works, the theory of mind, the seeing yourself from another point of view is so important in magic. And I wanted to make sure that people who probably didn't even want to learn a trick would be able to benefit from some of the philosophical thinking that's gone on in magic. So both of those things are in the MasterClass.
Excellent. Well, if you want to check out the MasterClass, how do you do that?
MasterClass.com?
Just go to masterclass.com.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's a whole list of stuff. Yeah.
And one of the reasons that Penn Jillette came here was to talk also about Fool Us, his show on the CW, which is in its 6th season.
Yeah, we did something. You know, what I love about our show is that we don't. It's very delineated what we're talking about. Did they fool us or did they not? We don't talk about what their success is going to be, how they're going to do. We don't pretend like America's Got Talent, that we're some sort of sages of show business. It's just, did you happen to fool us? And this season, we decided to do something none of these shows have ever done, and I understand why now. We decided to turn the tables, and we went out to try to fool the judges. and the judge we got was David Copperfield. So we went out to do a trick on our stage with Copperfield sitting where we sit to see if we could fool him. And I got to tell you, we thought it was a great idea and a great stunt. Wouldn't this be funny? Wouldn't this be fun? And we're about ready to do it, and Copperfield's sitting there. And I look over at Teller, and his hand's trembling like this, which I had never seen. In 20 years, I hadn't seen this. Teller's going to pick up a deck of cards, and he's shaking that much. And me, I'm going, can I get a drink of water? My mouth was completely cotton mouth, completely dry. We were scared as we've ever been. And man, it's nice to be able to get that feeling at 64 years old.
That's see,
Terror.
it just means you're always a learner. You are always a learner. Thank you so much for coming out. So many more questions that I wish I could ask, but I'm really so pleased to hear what an advocate of women and girls you are. I knew you were an interesting guy. I imagine some of that comes from your late mom. I wore a red nail for
Oh, thank you so much.
But mine is a Sharpie, and it looks like crap if you're right here. So good thing we're in relief.
Mine's well
His
manicured.
Jelly Apple Red, right,
Yep,
by
that's
Essie.
what it is, yeah.
And this, of course, is Penn Jillette, and thank you so much for joining us
thank
today
you.
on Salon Talks. Come back, and I can't wait to see what you have, maybe not up your sleeve, but somewhere else next.
Thanks.
Have a great afternoon.